The luxury store bustled with high-end shoppers, their designer bags dangling from their wrists like trophies. Sales associates moved swiftly, catering to well-dressed customers, flashing rehearsed smiles and eager nods. But when he walked in, the atmosphere shifted. A man in his late 40s, dressed in worn-out jeans and an old jacket, entered the store, his tired eyes scanning the expensive displays. His posture was relaxed, almost too casual for a place like this. He moved slowly, running his fingers along the shelves, studying the price tags without urgency. Behind the counter, a young saleswoman, perfectly styled with an expensive watch on her wrist, wrinkled her nose in annoyance. She tapped her nails against the counter and rolled her eyes as she whispered to a colleague. "Ugh. Another window shopper," she muttered. "Probably can't afford a single thing in here." She waited, watching the man as he casually browsed. He picked up a luxury wallet, turning it over in his hands. That was enough for her. With a fake smile, she strutted over, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "Excuse me, sir," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I think you'll be more comfortable at the discount store down the street. Our items might be a little out of your budget." The words cut through the air like a blade. A few customers turned their heads, sensing the tension. The man looked up, raising an eyebrow, but said nothing. Instead, he placed the wallet back on the shelf and clasped his hands behind his back, amused. The saleswoman smirked, taking his silence as embarrassment. "I mean, we do have a policy against handling merchandise if you're not planning to buy," she continued, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "We just don't want people wasting our time." This time, more people looked. A couple of customers whispered. One of the senior employees at the far counter stiffened but didn't intervene. Still, the man didn't respond. Then, slowly, he smirked. It was a calm, confident smirk, not the reaction she was expecting. The saleswoman's smile faltered for a second. She had humiliated plenty of people before, but this felt different. The way the man looked at her wasn't shame, it was knowing. Like he had a secret. Before she could speak again, the store doors suddenly swung open. A well-dressed man in a sleek black suit strode in with authority, scanning the room like he owned the place. His eyes locked onto the browsing man immediately. And the next words out of his mouth made everyone freeze. The store went silent. The well-dressed man who had just entered the store carried himself with the kind of confidence that turned heads. His suit was sharp, his shoes polished to perfection, and his watch glinted under the bright showroom lights. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward the customer, the same man the saleswoman had just humiliated. The rude employee watched in confusion as the executive's face broke into a respectful smile. "Sir, I had no idea you were coming in today," the suited man said quickly, offering his hand for a firm handshake. "If I had known, I would have personally arranged for your visit." The saleswoman's smirk disappeared instantly. The older customer, whom she had mocked just moments ago, accepted the handshake with a nod. But his calm smirk remained, his eyes flickering briefly to the stunned employee. The air shifted. The other employees, who had silently enjoyed the humiliation just minutes ago, suddenly straightened up. One of them, sensing danger, grabbed a cloth and began furiously dusting a perfectly clean display shelf. Another adjusted their name tag, pretending to be deeply invested in their sales reports. But the saleswoman? Her throat felt dry. Something was very wrong. Sorry, but, who exactly is he?" she stammered, trying to control the panic rising in her chest. The executive's smile instantly vanished. His head turned slowly toward her, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know?" His voice was dangerously calm. The saleswoman gulped, forcing a nervous chuckle. "Well, no. I mean, how would I?" She tried to regain control. "I just assumed." You assumed, the executive cut her off sharply. His gaze was like ice. The saleswoman swallowed hard. The man she had humiliated watched the exchange with quiet amusement. He hadn't said much yet, but he didn't need to. Sir, please accept my apologies, the executive turned back to the customer, his voice filled with urgency. This is unacceptable behavior in our establishment. I can assure you this employee will be dealt with immediately. And just like that, the saleswoman's world began to collapse. Her lips parted, panic setting in. Wait, sir, there's been a misunderstanding. No, the executive's voice was final. There hasn't. Other employees stepped back, wanting no part of what was about to happen. A heavy silence filled the store. And then the customer finally spoke. His voice was calm, yet powerful. I don't believe in misunderstandings, he said, eyes locked onto the woman. I believe in choices. And you made yours. She felt the ground beneath her disappear. And that's when she knew, she was about to lose everything. The silence in the store felt suffocating. The saleswoman's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. I can explain, she stammered, forcing a weak smile. I thought. You thought I didn't belong here. The customer's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. The kind that made her skin prickle with discomfort. The executive let out a sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. Sir, I take full responsibility for this. The customer raised a hand, cutting him off effortlessly. No need, he said. His eyes stayed fixed on the saleswoman. Let her take full responsibility. She froze. The weight of his words hit her like a punch to the gut. The executive stepped forward, his voice lower now. Perhaps you should know who you were speaking to before you made your judgment. The saleswoman clenched her fists. I just made a small mistake. I didn't know who he was, how could I? The executive tilted his head slightly. Then let me tell you. He turned toward the gathering employees, ensuring everyone heard his next words loud and clear. This man, he gestured to the unassuming customer, isn't just anyone. He is one of our silent investors. A ripple of shock spread across the store. Even customers stopped pretending not to eavesdrop. The saleswoman felt her knees go weak. An investor? Her lips parted, but no words came out. The executive wasn't finished. He has a direct influence on our policies, hiring decisions, and store operations. If he wishes, he could change everything about this business with a single decision. The customer's eyes held no malice, but there was an unmistakable authority behind them now. And yet, he continued, you spoke to me as if I was beneath you. Because of my clothes? My appearance? He exhaled, shaking his head. You judged me in seconds, without even knowing my name. The saleswoman felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just a bad customer experience, this was career-ending. Her mind raced. Sir, I swear, I didn't mean any harm. You just assumed. His voice was calm, but undeniably final. She swallowed hard. Please. I can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. The man studied her for a long moment. Then, he spoke the words that sealed her fate. Some mistakes, he said, can't be fixed. The store remained dead silent. And the next words out of the executive's mouth shattered her world completely. You're fired. The words hit her like a slap. The saleswoman blinked, certain she had misheard. What? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The executive crossed his arms. You're fired. Effective immediately. Her breath hitched. A sickening wave of panic crashed over her. Wait. No, please, she blurted out, her polished confidence shattering in an instant. The customer, the man she had just insulted, stood there, watching. Expression unreadable. She turned to him in desperation. "Sir, please. I made a mistake. I swear I didn't mean it." The other employees avoided eye contact. Customers whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads. For the first time, she felt small. The executive's voice remained cold. "It's not just one mistake. It's your attitude." She grasped for control. "But I've been here for years. I know the products better than anyone." The customer finally spoke. "And yet, you failed at the most basic thing." He tilted his head. "Respect." The saleswoman's stomach twisted. She had to fix this. I'll change," she cried out, eyes darting between the executive and the customer. "I swear, I'll treat people better. Just give me one more chance." The executive exchanged a glance with the investor. A silent understanding passed between them. Finally, the executive sighed. "This isn't about giving second chances," he said, voice steady. "This is about the kind of person you chose to be. And we can't have people like that representing this store." Her hands trembled. No, you can't do this. You can't just ruin my career over one moment." The customer's eyes darkened. One moment is all it takes to ruin someone else's. The words hit harder than anything else. A flash of every customer she had ever dismissed, humiliated, or ignored ran through her mind. She had never cared before. But now? Now it was happening to her. And suddenly, she understood. But it was too late. The executive turned to security. "Escort her out." A uniformed guard stepped forward. She felt the walls close in. "No, please. I need this job. I have bills to pay. I have." She stopped herself. The investor raised an eyebrow. "Interesting," he mused. "Now, suddenly, you understand what it feels like to be treated as less than. The saleswoman shook her head furiously, tears threatening to spill. "This isn't fair." The customer gave a final smirk. "Neither was the way you treated me." And with that, security led her out the door. As it swung shut behind her, a heavy silence filled the store. The executive turned to the investor. "I'll make sure this never happens again, sir." The investor gave a small nod. And then, to everyone's surprise, he spoke one final sentence before walking out. "Oh, I'm not done yet." The entire store went tense. Something else was about to happen. And no one had any idea what it was. The store was silent. Employees stood frozen, waiting for what would happen next. The investor, the man they had judged too quickly, glanced around the showroom. His gaze was calm yet piercing, sweeping over every nervous employee, as if weighing their worth. Finally, he exhaled, shaking his head. "This isn't just about one employee," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's about a culture." The executive stiffened. "Sir, I assure you, this was an isolated." "No, it wasn't," the investor interrupted, his words slicing through the excuse like a blade. "I've been here for less than an hour, and I've already seen how customers are treated when they don't look the part." Several employees shifted uncomfortably. He continued, taking slow, deliberate steps across the showroom. "How many others have walked in here and been dismissed? How many left feeling less than human?" He paused, turning to the executive. "How many complaints have you ignored?" The executive hesitated. One of the employees, a younger associate near the back, lowered his head. He had witnessed things, heard things, but had always stayed quiet. "Not anymore." "He's right," the young associate suddenly said, his voice trembling slightly. Everyone turned to him in shock. "I've seen it happen before. That woman wasn't the only one who judged people like that, he admitted. She was just the loudest. A murmur rippled through the staff. Some looked guilty. Others looked terrified. The executive rubbed his temples, realizing that things were spiraling beyond his control. The investor wasn't finished. You can sell all the luxury products in the world, but if this is how you treat people, your store is worthless. He turned to the executive. And right now, so is your leadership. The executive flinched, his face going pale. One of the higher-ranking managers, who had been watching silently from the back, finally stepped forward. Sir, what do you suggest? The investor's lips curled into a small, knowing smirk. Change, he said simply. Starting now. The room hung on his words. The executive swallowed hard. What kind of change? The investor turned toward the employees. Every person in this store will be re-evaluated, he declared. Because let me make one thing very clear, attitude matters more than experience. Several employees exchanged uneasy glances. Starting today, there will be a new hiring policy. No more favoring people just because they look polished on paper. No more promoting employees who treat others like dirt. If you think your title makes you better than the customers who walk through those doors. His voice hardened. Then you have no place here. The executive felt the walls closing in on him. Yes, sir, you can't just. I can, the investor interrupted. His eyes flickered toward the nameplate on the counter. And then he delivered the final, devastating blow. Because as of this moment. He picked up the plate that read General Manager. This title is mine. The store erupted in gasps. The executive staggered back, his face drained of color. You're taking over? The investor smiled. Consider it an investment in human decency. For the first time in years, the employees saw true leadership in the store. And they knew, things were never going to be the same again. The revelation hit the store like an earthquake. The investor was now the new general manager. Employees stood frozen, their minds racing with what this meant for their future. Some were terrified. Others, especially the junior staff who had long endured unfair treatment, felt a spark of hope. The former executive, still pale, struggled to keep his composure. Sir, you can't just. I can, the investor cut him off, his voice unwavering. And I have. The executive opened his mouth to argue, but then he saw the look in the investor's eyes. This wasn't up for debate. Silence hung in the air. Finally, an older employee, one of the longest-serving staff members, found the courage to speak up. Sir, he said hesitantly, I don't mean any disrespect, but, why are you doing this? Why do you care so much? The investor turned to him, studying the employee's worn uniform and tired eyes. There was no arrogance, no hostility, just genuine curiosity. And for the first time, the investor decided to tell his story. I wasn't always wealthy, he said, his voice softer now, but still strong. A long time ago, I walked into a store just like this one. He paused. I wasn't dressed well. I didn't look important. The employees leaned in, listening closely. The staff laughed at me. Treated me like a joke. Refused to even answer my questions. His jaw clenched slightly. One of them even told me I didn't belong there. A few employees lowered their heads in shame. That day, I made myself a promise. He glanced around. I swore that one day, I'd come back, not to buy anything, but to see if the world had changed. He let that sink in. And today? He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. I found out that nothing has changed. A deep silence filled the store. The employees saw him differently now. He wasn't just a powerful man throwing his weight around. He had lived what they had ignored. The investor exhaled. I don't care how much money someone has in their pocket. I care about who they are as a person. He turned to the remaining employees. And that's the kind of culture we're going to build here. The former executive stared at the floor, defeated. Some employees exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. But then, something unexpected happened. A junior employee, someone who had always been overlooked, stepped forward and clapped. A single, firm clap. Then another. And another. And before anyone knew it, half the store was applauding. Not out of fear. Out of respect. The investor smiled slightly, but his eyes remained sharp. This isn't just about me, he reminded them. This is about all of us. And with that, he turned to the stunned former executive and said, "Now, let's talk about some real changes." The energy in the store had completely shifted. Employees who once carried themselves with arrogance now stood with uncertainty. Others, those who had been ignored or overlooked, finally felt seen. The former executive, still stunned, sat stiffly in one of the store's luxury lounge chairs. His face was pale, his hands clasped tightly together. Meanwhile, the rude employee, the one who had insulted the investor just hours ago, sat outside on a bench. She was still in shock. Her perfectly curated world had shattered in seconds. She had believed her position made her untouchable. That her confidence and seniority gave her control over customers. But now? She had nothing. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through her phone, trying to distract herself. But every time she lifted her head, she could see people whispering, stealing glances at her. News had spread fast. She felt humiliated. Then, suddenly, the store doors opened. She tensed, expecting to see security or the executive coming to make things even worse. But instead, it was him. The man she had insulted. The investor. She froze. He approached slowly, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. She swallowed hard. "Why are you here?" she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head. "Why do you think?" She looked away, gripping her bag. "If you're here to rub it in, don't bother." The investor chuckled. "You think that's why I came?" She didn't answer. Instead, she felt a wave of bitterness rise in her throat. "This isn't fair," she muttered, her voice shaking. "I worked my way up in that store. I earned my position. And now, because of one mistake, it's all gone." The investor sighed. "It wasn't just one mistake." She clenched her jaw. "You judged me before you even knew me," he continued, his voice even. "You decided I was beneath you. And I'm guessing," he glanced at her, "that wasn't the first time you've done it." She stiffened but said nothing. A few beats of silence passed. Then, to her shock, he sat down beside her. "I could walk away right now and let you figure out your next steps alone," he said. "But instead, I'm going to give you something most people wouldn't." She hesitated. "What?" He turned to her. "A second chance." Her head snapped toward him in disbelief. "Why?" She blurted. "After everything I did, why would you do that?" He leaned back slightly. "Because someone once gave me one." She looked away, ashamed. "But," he added, his voice firm, "it won't be easy." She tensed. "This isn't about just keeping a job. It's about proving you've actually learned something," he continued. "Because if you walk back into that world without changing, you're just going to end up here again." She swallowed hard. "And if I say no?" He shrugged. "Then you'll keep making the same mistakes. Over and over." She stared at the ground. She had spent years believing she was better than others. But now, for the first time, she felt completely powerless. And it scared her. The investor stood. "Your choice," he said. "But if you want a different ending to your story." He pulled a card from his pocket and placed it beside her. "Call me." And with that, he walked away, leaving her alone with a decision that would define her future. The small business card stared back at her. Her fingers hovered over it, hesitant, as if touching it would somehow make her choice real. For the first time in her life, she had no power, no status, no certainty. She had always been in control. Always the one deciding who mattered, who deserved attention, who was worth her time. And now? Now, she was just another person sitting outside a store, wondering where to go next. Her pride screamed at her to throw the card away. To walk away and prove she didn't need help. But something deeper, something heavier settled in her chest. A quiet voice in her mind whispered. "What if this is your last chance to change?" Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the card. It had only a name and a phone number, no fancy titles, no business logos. Her heart pounded as she pulled out her phone. She hesitated for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, she dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Glad you called." Her throat felt tight. I don't even know why I did." A chuckle on the other end. "Because deep down, you know you need this." She exhaled sharply, trying to keep the humiliation out of her voice. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause. Then, the investor's voice came through, firm yet calm. Now you learn." 3 months later. A luxury hotel lobby buzzed with life. Guests in suits and evening gowns strolled past, the air thick with the scent of wealth and polished marble. At the front desk, a new employee stood confidently, greeting a customer with a genuine, warm smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice filled with humility and grace. "How can I assist you today?" The customer, dressed in casual, slightly worn clothes, smiled back. A familiar figure sat in the distance, watching quietly from a corner lounge. The investor nodded to himself. She had made her choice. She had chosen change. And that was worth more than any job title. 3 months ago, she had lost everything in an instant. Her arrogance, her pride, and her belief that status mattered more than kindness had cost her not just her job, but her entire identity. But now, she had rebuilt herself from the ground up. She had taken the investor's offer, not as a favor, but as a challenge. She started at the bottom, learning what it truly meant to serve others, not just judge them. At first, it had been humiliating. The idea of working in a hotel, catering to travelers, assisting guests, even handling their complaints, it had been beneath her. Or so she had thought. But something changed. She saw how the best employees weren't the ones with the fanciest resumes or the most expensive suits. They were the ones who knew how to treat people. And for the first time, she began to understand why she had failed before. The unexpected reunion. One evening, as she finished assisting a guest at the front desk, a familiar figure walked in. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The investor. The man she had once insulted in that luxury store. She straightened her posture. Not out of fear, but out of respect. He approached the counter, a small smirk playing on his lips. "I see you made it," he said. She met his gaze directly, no longer the defensive, arrogant woman she once was. "Yes," she said, with quiet confidence. "I did." He studied her for a long moment. And then, with a nod, he said something she never expected. "I'm proud of you." Her chest tightened, emotions rising in her throat. It was the first time in years that someone had said those words to her. And the first time she actually felt like she had earned them. The investor placed something on the counter. A familiar business card. Only this time, there was something new printed on it. Her name. And a job title. She stared at it in shock. I don't understand. The investor smiled. You've proven yourself. If you want it, there's a management position waiting for you. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the card. A second chance. This time, she wasn't going to waste it. She looked up, her eyes clear. I won't let you down, she said. His smirk widened. I already know that. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, holding the future in her hands.